Tonight is kind of a special thing for the city of Huntsville. We've been working the big picture plan for, almost a year and a half now, and we've been going through and going piece by piece through the city and getting feedback about what we need to do, what our plans need to include, where we need to go, how we need to structure our city zoning-wise and transportation-wise and everything. And part of that process, we came across Smart Growth America, who has a great seminar, which we're going to be doing over the next day and a half, to talk about complete streets and how to have a better transportation system and how to take transportation systems and make them more pliable, make them work better, make a better ecosystem for us. And we started this process through the big picture. As we came through the big picture, we started noticing that we had some places that we wanted to do some different things. We are a city built by engineers, and when you're built by engineers, you build 5-lane roads that make traffic go down them. Now, as we have as we have aged and as we've gotten older, some of those roads aren't taking as much capacity as they used to be. So what's the idea, and what are the ideas that we can do with some of those big roads? Can we do them road diets with them? Take them down, make them a little bit smaller, add pedestrian traffic and bike traffic to it, take a few cars off the road, and as we take a few cars off the road, maybe we have to do less millage, less pothole repair, and less of a lot of other things. And as we look through that process and move through that process, it's just a total planning process. And so through that, as we started talking about this, we came across this program. And John Robert Smith, who was the former mayor of Meridian, Mississippi, who was a long-term, as I call him, a long-suffering mayor. He suffered for 16 years as mayor, and then he reformed and became a planner. And I told him, I said, in the city of Huntsville, we have something like 20,000 planners now. Maybe only 2 of them have a degree, but we have 20,000 people who are interested in planning. And that's one of the great things, because we're all planners. I can sit around my table upstairs in the mayor's office when we have our daily meetings. There's 8 or 9 or 10 of us, and every one of us wants to be a planner really bad. And finally we have to point over there and say, there's the real planner over there. They're going to have to tell us where to go and what to do and how to make this work. But to each of you, I want to say thank you, and you can each of you put your badge on tonight, because you are a planner. You're a planner for the city of Huntsville, and you are helping us talk about and look at some new ideas and new ways to look at our road systems, our transportation system, our ecosystem. And I think that you will find that there's a lot of different things that we can do as to what we've been doing in the past. So John Roberts, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I want to say thank you for coming to our community. Thank you for sharing with us over the next day and a half, and we look forward to some great things and coming out with a little bit better direction in that big picture and making it a little bit more clear-cut as we move forward into coming down with our final plan. And as we say, a plan is a plan until we can implement it. So thank you so much.
Mayor, thank you for that very kind introduction. I want to tell you how pleased we are to be in your hometown of Huntsville, Alabama. You know, my work carries me all over the country, but I'm always pleased to get back to a part of this nation where the people understand I do not speak with an accent. And I'm joined by my colleague Emiko Atherton, who is the director of the National Complete Streets Coalition, that will be working with me and presenting with me tomorrow. Now, Emiko does speak with an accent, I'll forewarn you. But it is good to be with you, and I want to tell you how we got here tonight. I am Senior Policy Advisor to Smart Growth America, and I am also the Chairman of Transportation for America. And as Policy Advisor to Smart Growth America, I lead the team that provides technical assistance to cities across the country under a grant from the Environmental Protection Agency. So we offer 12 different types of workshops we call tools, and we hold a national competition every year. We're in our 6th year now. and cities must apply for one of those 12 tools, and they go through an application process, which is pretty rigid, and then the finalists are interviewed. So we had 68 cities to compete for 7 open slots to receive technical assistance. That list was winnowed down by staff to 21, and then I personally called all of the chief elected officials for those 21 cities or regions, and we had a further interview. Because it's one thing for the talented staff to craft a very good application. It's another to have the city leadership committed to and behind the process that we will engage you in. So you should be very pleased that out of 68 places from all over the country, very large metropolitan areas and some much smaller than Huntsville, you are one of 7 that were chosen to receive this technical assistance. This year we will provide technical assistance in places like Kansas City, Missouri, and Seattle, Washington, Anchorage, Alaska, North Little Rock, Arkansas, Longwood, Florida, Royal Oak, Michigan, and Huntsville, Alabama. And there are many different tools. You chose to compete for the Complete Streets tool, and that's what we're here to deliver for you. So you should be very proud. And the mayor and I were talking about serving as mayor, and being mayor of your hometown is the best job you'll ever have. It's also the worst job you'll ever have. And you'll feel those competing emotions sometimes within the same hour. If we're talking about complete streets, I'm a Presbyterian, but I was at the Episcopal Church in Meridian, and I was down front taking communion, kneeling at the bar, and between the bread and the wine, the gentleman next to me nudged me in the ribs and said, "Mayor, on your way home, I want you to look at the curb cuts on Poplar Springs Drive." And I said, the Lord and I are doing business here. If you'll give me just a minute, we can talk about it after church. But that's part of being mayor and part of the fun as well. So I want to talk about how we got to where we are as cities across the country, and that applies to Meridian and to Huntsville as well. And it's a matter of choice, how we got here, and it's a matter of choice about the future you're going to create. You know, most of us, especially my age in this room and older, grew up in a typical downtown. You had a nice grid pattern of streets. You had a mix of use in that downtown. You could walk down to the corner grocery store. You could walk to the corner barber shop and get your hair cut. You had the amenities of life you needed within a reasonably close proximity to where you live. But that began to change after World War II, when returning GIs came back and the federal government gave them incentives to build new homes outside of the downtown. And then they developed the interstate highway system. And all of a sudden, we actually incentivized a migration out of city centers into suburban areas. And, you know, we thought we were going to get endless highways with no traffic and just move seamlessly across this country. And we also would get, every day would hold a new ribbon cutting for a new highway or a new byway, and there you might see the lovely Miss Concrete and the equally lovely Miss Blacktop. Could you imagine going home and asking your daughter to serve as Miss Blacktop for the day? But what we actually got was this. This is a handicapped accessible sidewalk. I don't make up these pictures. They actually are in places that exist. Handicapped accessible sidewalk. I'm not sure what you're supposed to do when you get to that large pole in the middle of the sidewalk. And Mayor, this is clearly the city street doesn't meet the county side of the street, and it's the county's fault, of course. But this is actually some of the planning that you see across this country. And then, of course, we got this. Some bumper-to-bumper gridlock traffic. And when we talk about how we developed, you planners were part of the problem years ago, because you decided that we would all be better if we segregated our uses. We would have industrial in one place, we would have commercial in another, we would live in a separate residential area, all separated from the other, and then we'd go to school in yet another, and we would connect it by one large thoroughfare. And with that, we developed these typical cul-de-sac neighborhoods, and we got this kind of residential development. No sidewalks, just a street, because no one's going to walk. I mean, you can tell by the house that the car is preeminent because the garage is right out front. The caretakers for the car actually live in the back. And then we got this. And we wonder why we have the highest obesity rates in the country. But things are changing, folks. It's changing demographically, and it's changing the way we recruit economic development for our communities. And it's being driven by the two largest generations ever in the history of this country, the baby boom generation and the millennial generation. Now, you Gen Xers, your generation's just too small to count. I mean, you're crushed between the boomers and the millennials. I represent one of those generations. What was a nice bell-shaped curve has now become a thick column because your boomers are living longer than any generation is expected to live, staying more active, more mobile, and your millennials now represent not only the largest generation, but the largest part of the workforce in this country. And we're seeing that the retirement of the baby boomers is going to hit over the next couple of decades. We talked about the rise of the millennials and smaller households being needed both by retiring baby boomers, but also by the millennials. Okay, advance. And all of society is being driven by the preferences of those two polar generations. All right, boomers are downsizing. We don't want to mow an acre of grass anymore. And we finally have the children out of the house. We think that the senior population itself is getting older and larger as a portion of this of our demographics, and the number of senior households will grow twice as fast as all of the others put together. Millennials are different in that they are choosing where they want to live first, and then they get a job. Exactly the opposite of what we did. And where they're choosing to live are in cool places that have cool downtowns. National Association of Realtors, whose whole future depends on being able to predict where the housing market is going, tell us that 78% say that their neighborhood is more important than the size of the house. I think the days of the McMansion are over. And 57% say they would forego the home with a larger yard if they could get a home with a shorter commute to work and an easier commute to work. The economic drivers have changed. We're moving from a manufacturing economy to a knowledge economy, and the smart developers are no longer chasing smokestacks, they're chasing talent. And that's where you have to be competitive. You know, Mayor, we say as we run for office, I'm going to create jobs. Well, now the truth is, at best, you create the environment where others create jobs. But that's what we say. So let's ask the producers of those jobs what they're looking for. So we found that there were 500 large companies and businesses that have moved out of office parks and out of remote locations into downtowns in the past 5 years. We thought we knew why, but we interviewed those 500 to find out, and it's in our core values report. You can pull up online and download that full report. But the bottom line is they all said we're chasing that talented young workforce, and we can't get them to come to where we are. So we're relocating to where they want to be. And we looked at the places they moved from and to, and we found that their walk score, and you can pull up your address online and you can get the walk score for your address. The walk score went from 52, which is not very walkable, to 88, which is almost a walker's paradise. It went from, the transit score went up, as did the bike score. So they moved to places and purposely sought those places that had transit, walkability, and bikeability. Right there. And the places they were moving, Minneapolis, Indianapolis, downtown Cleveland, Newark, but also into, go ahead and advance it. Conway, Arkansas, little Conway, Arkansas, drew 3 large tech firms, and the president of the 3 tech firms said, we chose Conway because they have a downtown that young people will want to be in, working, and live in. So it turns to be the economic driver for them. And also how you build your community, the infrastructure of your community has a direct impact on your city budget for decades to come. We found that if you use smarter ways of developing a little more densely, and in the South, that doesn't mean 20 stories tall, that means giving life to the second floor or third floor of business, places in your downtown anyway that are empty. But a little more dense, a better connected street grid, offering walkability, bikeability, those things that cost a third less upfront in infrastructure costs, saves you 10% of delivering services over the lifetime and 10 times more tax revenue into the city. So we did a case study for Nashville, Tennessee at their request. And you know, you're competing with Nashville, Tennessee, and you're competing with Chattanooga, Tennessee. So we looked at 3 different neighborhoods in Nashville. One is called, well, we missed one, Bradford Hills. Typical suburban neighborhood, cul-de-sac streets. Again, the house with the car garage right out in front of it. We looked at that. We'd also looked at Lennox Village, which is more of a new urbanist development. It's kind of a faux downtown built out in a green space, but a little better grid system. Some sidewalks there. And then we looked at the Gulch. Now, as mayor, I would never have let them call it the Gulch, but it is over an abandoned rail yard, and it's very mixed use there with apartments and with office space and some light manufacturing and retail and lots of apartments there. And we ran the numbers using Nashville's own data. Now, we aren't using regional data. We took their data for what it costs to lay a foot of water, sewer, pave a street, run the school bus system, provide water and sewer, what it costs to build a small fire station for 2 pieces of equipment, those kind of things. If you look at Bradford Hills, your cost to deliver service to the city is just as much as the revenue you get back in taxes for that per acre. So that's a wash. And you might say, well, a wash is okay. At least we broke even. But it's not, because, Mayor, you've got to have that. You've got to have more revenue than cost of delivering service so you can build parks and those things people want that you can't do if you're breaking even. Lennox Village is a little better, about $780 per acre more in revenue than cost to provide service. But look at the Gulch. Almost $116,000 net gain per acre of revenue over cost. Well, a city government's going to say, give me more of that. And walkable cities are creative cities and draw that young, talented workforce, and it's happening in small cities and towns and large places as urban areas as well as great metropolitan areas. And I want to take just a minute. We talked about creating a sense of place and tell about my place where I served for 16 years, my hometown of Meridian, Mississippi. We're on the Mississippi-Alabama border. We're about 43,000. We are the retail, medical, employment, educational, entertainment trade draw for 350,000 people in 7 rural counties in Mississippi and Alabama around us. And when you're talking about developing your community, then your identity, knowing who you are, is critically important. And I think there are three questions that must be asked and answered if you're going to be successful as you move towards this new strategic plan and a vision that will carry you for 50 years. Who were you in the past? Why did they build a city here rather than somewhere else? Who are you now? And that has to be an unvarnished look at what you've become, good and bad. But the most important question that you have to ask and answer is, who do you aspire to be? And if you can't go home and tell your grandchild what this city will be like when they are your age, then you don't have a sustainable plan for the future. Well, Meridian's past was two railroads crossed there and need a city to grow up, and we became a railhead in the South, connecting 70% of the nation's population within a one-day's rail ride from Mississippi. And we were incorporated in 1860, and that very rail infrastructure drew General Sherman and 10,000 federal troops in the spring of 1864. Now, General Sherman brought his own brand of urban renewal to Meridian, where he burned every structure in the city to the ground, heated the steel rails, tied them around trees to form Sherman's bow ties. But after the Sherman left, the people of Meridian rebuilt that rail infrastructure because they realized not only was it the reason for their birth, it would be the reason for their rebirth after this disastrous war. And what a city they built. The city was rebuilt by German Jewish immigrants who came to Meridian because of the transportation connections throughout the community. They built this fabulous city, also built a grand Union Station that would connect some 26 passenger trains out of Meridian across the country. But the question of who you are now, that's what was left of that once grand train station when I was on the city council. You might say, well, that doesn't tell me much, but I think it tells you a great deal. It tells you that we turned our back on our history. We turned our back on our transportation connections that made us great, and worst of all, we turned our back on our future. So who do you aspire to be? Well, we built the South's first multimodal transportation center some 25 years ago. These are some designs of it because you have to give people something visual they can see and hold on to. That was our aspirational dream. That's what we built. Again, opened about 24 years ago, and it has had great impact. It pulls the Amtrak service, which I like to think runs from Meridian south to New Orleans and starts in Meridian, runs north to New York. But it pulls the Amtrak service, our city transit service, airport connections, all in an intercity bus into one facility. And the development in the downtown, that project has leveraged the city's investment 100 to 1. So $160 million investment within 3 blocks of that city. This is right across the street from Union Station at the Terminal Hotel, where there are office spaces above, and below is a little restaurant, unfortunately you still named the Terminal Cafe. But we've seen people begin to build condominiums and apartments living in the downtown. This is the Riley Center for Performing Arts. It's an 1889 Grand Opera House and an 1890 department store that's now a conference facility for Mississippi State University. And that's the interior of that facility. We have an arrangement with the Kennedy Center in DC. They send entertainment down to Meridian. Robust performance schedule, September through May. You can see Itzhak Perlman and the Meridian Symphony Orchestra perform, or Hal Holbrook perform Mark Twain's Night, or the Soweto Gospel Choir. Wonderful, varied schedule of entertainment, and imagine the impact that has on a small town's educational system and the draw from the region. And it also, located on that block, is the soon-to-be erected Mississippi Art and Entertainment Center, where we focus on the creative genius of Mississippi artists in literature and music and all of the arts is defined. And in downtown living, that's right across from that opera house. close attention made to the streets and the sidewalks and the landscaping and the apartments and condominiums that have developed. You would think you're in downtown New York or in Soho. Condominiums going for $250,000 to $500,000 unfinished space, as well as market rate apartments. And when you do these things, you begin to build a robust heart in the downtown, where you can actually have art galleries, and these are all market rate apartments, and where you can, if there was no nightlife in downtown Meridian before this, none. I was a single parent with 2 small children, and we had downtown to ourselves after 5 o'clock. Literally. Now we have life and young people in the downtown, and those small children are now young adults, and they're in the downtown enjoying that. And you know, the things I've talked about take more than a term in office, take more than 3 terms in office. Your vision as a community has to be a 40-year or a 50-year vision. And I want you to find a point on the horizon line that you care about desperately, but you may not occupy that point in the future of Huntsville. And for me, I find that future point reflected in the eyes of my grandson Ethan and his baby brother Hayden. You see, if we don't make those choices correctly today in Meridian and plan a life not that we want, but they want for the future, then Ethan and Hayden aren't going to find a meaningful life in the home their great-great-grandfather built, and will not take a train out of the station their grandfather built. So for me, I think that sense of intergenerational connectivity is best captured in the poetry of Vachel Lindsay when he writes about his hometown of Springfield, Illinois. Record it for the grandson of your son. A city is not built in a day. Our little town cannot complete her soul till countless generations pass away. We must have Lincoln-hearted men, for a city is not built in a day. And they must come and go and do their work while countless generations pass away. I urge you, as you work through this strategic planning process in our little workshop tomorrow, to be Lincoln-hearted in your commitment to the people you love in the place you love, your hometown of Huntsville.
Well, thank you. I think John Robert really, Mayor Smith really laid the foundation for why something like this is so important, regardless of where you are. As Mayor Smith said, I definitely have an accent down here. I come from up north, and so I often think when I'm on the plane, like, you know, what am I doing? What can I bring? You know, I'm actually from the Pacific Northwest. I'm from Washington State. I now live in the same city as Mayor Smith in Washington, D.C., but I'm here to talk about complete streets and why it's really an approach that is embraced by cities and communities, small towns, suburbs, and big cities across the country as a way to start looking at building your transportation system, and transportation being one of the foundations for building that community that my grandchildren's children will want to live in. And so I should say I am the director of a group called the National Complete Streets Coalition. We are also a program of Smart Growth America, so John Robert and I sit by each other, but we do slightly different work where I head up a national coalition that promotes complete streets through advocacy, through research, and really through technical assistance into talking to communities like you about why this approach might work. So I'm here today to talk about really what is this like term when I think we've thrown it out a lot tonight, but what does that really mean? And then why would you have it, and who does it benefit? So I'm going to start out just by talking about the what. So complete streets are really, it's a way to start looking at how you do your transportation planning and decision making to think about all users. I always like to think this is a way that you're starting to change the DNA about how you think you plan, not just build your roadway system, how you repave it, how you maintain it, how you operate. So you're just thinking about everybody in this room. You're thinking about your grandparents. You're thinking about your grandchildren that aren't born. You're thinking about yourself. You're thinking about the entire community, and how can everyone move from point A to point B in a safe and convenient way. It's not I would say it's not about building like a bike lane and a sidewalk on every street, but creating a network for people to get around. The coalition actually created the Complete Streets movement a little over a decade ago, and what I love about this is that it was a group of people that came together, and they were thinking, this was in DC, thinking we want to talk to the federal government about how they can think about walkers and bikers when they do transportation planning, because we've typically, and it made sense at the time, since Mayor Smith was talking about, in post-World War II, we think about mostly the single occupancy vehicle. And so just how are we thinking about these? And it was groups like the AARP, it was groups like the Realtors, it was also groups like Smart Growth America coming together and saying, what's a way that, and I'm admitted, I'm a biker. I wear spandex on the weekend, but I know that that's not very, that's not always, I can speak to a certain audience, but how can we, how can this approach really work with everyone? And it was really this term Complete Streets came up as a way to think about all users in transportation planning, targeted at the federal government, surprisingly to no one. Nothing happened in Congress for a decade. We're really proud something happened last year. But communities like Huntsville were like, hey, this is actually a really good idea for a lot of other reasons I'm going to talk about. We want to do that. And in 2005, 30 cities adopted Complete Streets policies. And I'll go into really what those are in a little bit. But this year we expect to hit 1,000 policies in the United States, and that's at both the city, the regional, and the state level. And Congress has added Complete Streets language into their latest federal transportation bill, or the law that guides it. But they're like everything they do, a little bit behind the rest of us. So why do we have to do this? And Mayor Smith really built the case for why we want to build communities that we want to live in. But I'm going to talk about it just, my lens, the glasses I look through are always from a transportation lens. So we have streets that are inadequate. This is really what came out of this, this roadway, or this way of doing transportation planning that just thought about how we're going to move people through cars. There's no sidewalks, we took a little tour around today, and people end up doing dangerous things because they don't have a choice. We don't make streets really inviting for bus riders. We're not really incentivizing people to ride a bus. Not in Alabama, but in some other states. I've absolutely, it's like you're trying to figure out, I always think about, how are you even supposed to get to this bus stop? You have to and you're just like, okay, that's and then here's another one. I think this is actually in Atlanta. So again, this is an example of one. You've got a bus stop. You've got what we call, this is terrible, but they're called goat trails, where you can see how people would actually want to use the system, and then people hiding under a tree to get shade. So we're not creating a system where you'd ever want to get out of your car. We also make it really inaccessible for wheelchair users. The woman that started the Complete Streets Coalition, she found this picture. This is in San Francisco, a city that's known for its kind of, biking. You can see somebody going right through, and this is my hometown. I keep this picture, and this is Seattle, Washington. Traffic jams, and what's really sad is we really, again, we're known for our bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, one of those big kind of, northwest liberal cities. Well, this street, 2nd Avenue, I used to work on this street, and cyclists would use this because it'd be like a main thoroughfare, and there were so many injuries and fatalities that they've now built a bike lane in there. I would say this is incredibly sad, but the week before they installed the bike lane, I was no longer living in Seattle, but a woman was on her bike and she was struck and killed by a car, and I knew her. And this is a problem that hits everywhere from Pacific Northwest down to the Southeast. So we really believe that just every mode, and what we're talking about is whether you're using your feet, we all use our feet, whether you're on wheels, whatever those wheels may be, whether you're in a bus, in a car, on a horse, that it should be convenient, safe, comfortable, accessible, and that it should be reasonable. I think that's one of the other things we talk about is, you know, it will be, I remember I was in Baton Rouge recently, and I was like, I'm going to try to take the bus everywhere. Like, I work in this, I'm going to see how it goes. And they have an okay bus system, but what we call headway times, or how long it takes to get, you know, how often the bus comes, was like every hour, 2 hours. So that's not, you know, so it's not just about coverage, it's about frequency. So this is just, we actually know how to do this right, and we're doing this. This is what's called a kind of a pedestrian island when you're crossing the street. This is down in Arizona. This is in Austin, Texas. This is people waiting for the bus, but you've also got a buffered bike lane. So we know what to do, but mostly we wind up on this. People, you know, taking their lives in their hands to cross the street. We published a report called Dangerous by Design. It uses data to look at the most dangerous places to walk in America. I'm happy to say Alabama is not. It is Florida. But over the decade between 2003 and 2012, 48,000 people were killed while walking on America's streets. So more people were killed walking than they were in all the natural disasters that happened during that time, including like Hurricane Katrina, all of that. So it's actually an epidemic of pedestrian safety. Here's just another example of a roadway. I think we've got these in all of our cities. So complete streets policies. So how do you take this idea and actually turn it into something, into practice? You know, we believe in this, okay, you're going to change your DNA, but how do we do this? And so their cities, I mentioned, have created and adopted policies that say we're going to look at the entire, what we call right-of-way, every time we plan, design, construct, operate, and maintain our transportation system for safe access for all users. And we really feel like this policy adoption is important, kind of moving from this idea, the saying thing, to actually doing it. And again, you know, if you think about in your own life, or I always tell the story, you know, when I was in my 20s, I'm right in that middle group too. I'm not a millennial or a boomer. But when I was in my 20s, like, you know, I could kind of get away with like eating a hamburger or not exercising, and then I started getting older, and it was like, oh, nothing fits. I'm pretty, you know, I would like get out of breath walking upstairs, but every Sunday I had a roommate, and I'd be like, this week I'm not going to eat chocolate. Like, I would say, like, I am not going to eat chocolate this week. She'd be like, and then, like, come Monday, I'd have chocolate. Or, like, this week, I'm going to lose weight. And it was like, what are you going to do about it? And I wasn't really doing anything. And then I had this moment where I was like, I have to have a policy. It's more than just a resolution. I have to do something. And so I really started to operationalize this into my life, making these slow, incremental changes, like going to the outer aisles of the grocery store where you can buy like the fresh produce, the fresh fruit, the fresh meat, the fresh dairy. I just started getting up until it became this routine part of my life. And now I don't think about it. I mean, it's, you know, and it doesn't mean that once in a while I don't have a hamburger. I mean, who doesn't want, like, you know, some barbecue once in a while? But that my default, I'm going to talk about, is to think about healthy choices. And that's really what complete streets policies are, is it's just, you start to default think about all users when you're making any type of transportation planning choice. So you're just assuming that, you know, maybe a biker or walker or someone in a wheelchair, a kid, would use this, and you're going through that thought process thinking, well, is there a parallel street they could use? You know, or should we make sure that this accommodates cyclists? So you're asking yourself those questions every time. So again, you know, why have a complete streets policy? This is also, it's not just this thing that we believe you should do because it's the right thing to do, but it's also shifting investment so you create better streets really opportunistically. You're thinking about how to really create a better roadway system in all of the little things that you do. I was telling someone earlier, but it's like, it's not, you know, one of the biggest kind of pushbacks I get is, well, we don't have money for that. And that's, you know, that's a really fair thing. I think we're all, our personal budgets, you know, our city's budgets, but it's actually, I think in most Department of Transportations, which are your city agency that runs the roadway system, like 95% of the work they do is in maintenance and operations, like repaving work, going out with those potholes, like striping the lines with some paint. And it's thinking, every time I do that, like, maybe this is an opportunity to just narrow the lane a little bit and stripe a bike lane. It's these small things like me going to the buy fresh yogurt instead of yogurt pretzels that create a system. And then to make again you have these small low cost projects, but that you're really creating a user experience, a safe user experience throughout the whole system, and using these current funding sources. This is what I'm talking about. This is not an expensive project right here. This isn't like a mega bike lane you'd see, and we see some pictures of Europe that we're never we're not going to have, and doesn't really make sense, and we'll never. This would be like someday I would love to have I actually live in a very small apartment, so I can walk to work. But someday I wouldn't mind like a mansion, but I'm never going to afford one. But we can't afford these, and to save money, because sometimes you have to go back. You'll make choices, and you'll say, actually, this is those goat trails that I was showing earlier. That's showing people really want to use it. Well, to go back and fix that is a lot more expensive than it is to do it right the first time. And really, your ultimate goal is it's about again building that network. So throughout, so people. It's that idea that no matter who you are in this room, if we want to get from this room tonight to your house in whatever way you want, whether you're on rollerblades, whether you're in a wheelchair, whether you want to walk, whether you want to run in this weather, we can't control the weather, but that you have a good option to do it. And really to give all of you, and to give your city the political and community support to really take some bold choices. And then we say to address, this is something that I really believe in, but systematic inequalities. When you look at the roadway system across the country, really some of the areas with the worst access to transit are often some of the more lower income communities, and those are the communities that are struggling most with getting access to opportunities. So we look at transportation as actually a way to access healthcare, access your church, access your doctor's office. But that it's really hard to do if you don't have a safe way to get there, and you can't own a car. And people want this. This isn't something that this is what I love about this. This is not something that it's like me pushing on people. This is something that people are wanting. 66% of Americans, they want more freedom, but they don't feel like they have a choice, and they'd like to spend less time in their cars. And what that really means, they'd like to spend more time with their families, more time relaxing, more time just enjoying their lives. And nobody wants to be stuck in the car, but you really don't have a choice. When I moved from the West Coast to Washington, D.C., I was able to give up my car, because on the West Coast, which is similar, and you have to drive everywhere. There's no way I could have even gone to the grocery store without a car. And here I am talking about biking and walking, and I drove everywhere because I didn't have a choice. It's also that, many, as Mayor Smith was saying, many people, we expect a huge amount of the population to start getting older, but they want to age in place, but they feel like they don't have a choice in terms of, driving. I always think about my mom is 66, and she is retired, and she loves her home. She has a beautiful garden. I mean, she spent her whole life building this up, and her eyesight is going. And she calls me up really distressed because she doesn't have a sidewalk on her block. She doesn't have good transit access. And she's going to have to she lives alone now, she's going to have to make that choice. Can I stay in my house and kind of be isolated, or do I have to move to the downtown so I can get around because I can't drive anymore? And I think that's one of the reasons, AARP is one of my strongest supporters. They are huge advocates of complete streets, both at the federal and at the local level, because they get that. And then just who needs it? There are people, 1 in 5 Americans aged 65 plus don't drive. There's actually still 1 in 12 households who don't have a vehicle, and all of our kids don't drive or shouldn't be driving. And there's a huge amount of potential, even as, in cities like Huntsville to DC to Los Angeles, because most 50% of all trips are less than 3 miles, and 28% are less than a mile, but we drive a majority of these trips. So again, complete streets is, and I just really want to make sure that this point is really clear. It's not this one size fits all, like I can hand you a plan, this is how you're going to do it. And it doesn't mean that, I believe that there should be, I'd love to have, a bike lane on every street, but it's not practical and it's actually not needed. That it fits the context of the community. So what makes sense, even over in like Meridian might not make sense here in Huntsville because it's what you need, but it is applied to every street project. And it's that thinking, putting those lenses on when you look at every street project. This is again what it's not. It's not a silver bullet, but we're not. This isn't like this should be something that should empower all of you to create a great community. I talked about this, but there are 900 policies nationally. We think there's going to be 1,000 this year, and you've got 17 in Alabama, and hopefully 18 soon. But what I love about this is, I do come and I live from. I always feel like, I've got to build up my legitimacy down here. Mayor Smith is like, where are you from again? And I was like, Seattle. And he's like, oh, that just doesn't do down in the South. What do you know about the context here? But what I love about this, and I know this is a hard to read chart, but what this shows is the majority of complete streets policies aren't in the large cities. Only 5% of them are in like the big cities, like the New Yorks and the Chicagos. See them in small suburbs, 30%. In towns, around 13%. In mid-sized suburbs, 10%. So you look, and over half of these, we've also got rural counties, small cities. The majority of these aren't, these are things that actually make sense in all sizes of communities. So the who, and I'm going to go through this quickly because Mayor Smith talked about this a lot, because we say it's everybody, but when we say everybody, we really mean older adults, children, families, people with disabilities, and of course yourself. This is just how many people we're expecting are going to be 65 or older, and how many of them are would like to get out more. This isn't just about getting to the grocery store or getting to the doctor's appointments, but it's about that social isolation too. And people want to be able to engage. You want to go see your friends. You want to be able to walk there. My grandparents had to move into a retirement community because I think they started to get depressed because they were stuck. We took away my grandfather's license. He shouldn't have been driving. My grandma has never driven. And they got really depressed. And we went over there as much as we could, but they couldn't get around anymore. And so, we could bring them food. We could take them to the doctor's office. We could take them to church. But, the other 6 days of the week, they were alone. Children, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but who really benefit? So a third, like 1 in 3 kids in America are obese or overweight. And it's not just about how they are today, but this is setting them up for a lifetime of health problems. Families, and this is really what Mayor Smith talks about, is we want to create places that people want to live, that people want to come back to after they go to school, that companies want to locate, and then people with disabilities. 1 in 5 Americans has some type of disabilities, and yet we don't, even with the ADA, we don't think about them in the roadway system. And then what are we doing this for? So this is, of course, because it's the right thing to do, but there's these really great benefits. One, this is a hard to read graph, but essentially this is the safety. I talked about dangerous by design, but the Governor's Highway Safety Administration just came out with a report a few months ago that estimated that even though we are improving vehicle safety, like, do you remember when you didn't have to use a seatbelt? The number of pedestrians killed in car crashes in 2005 went up 10% compared to the last year. So where we have vehicle safety going up, we have pedestrian safety also going up, but they shouldn't be going up at the same time. And this is, one of the things, and I'll talk about this for those of you who are tomorrow, is some of this is just slowing. This isn't even about a bike lane or a sidewalk. It's about just slowing down the speed, which actually doesn't often impact travel time as much as they thought. But when you lower speed just a little bit, this shows the correlation between your risk of death and how fast a car is going. So how likely you are to be injured at being hit 20 miles an hour versus 70. And then there's the health crisis, and this is one of the major reasons that I have a background in public health, and why I really got, I'm not a planner, I'm not an engineer, I worked in transportation and public health policy and how they come together. This shows, just in 2014, the percentage of adults age 16 or older who are obese. You can see Alabama's right up there. And then this correlates with, so we have obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and then physical activity. And I took this slide from Mayor Smith because this is just phenomenal. When you look at there is an absolute link. But if people don't have places to recreate, if people, do you remember, I used to spend all summer long, we'd leave the doors unlocked, and you just run or bike to your friends' houses. And you never, I don't have kids, but when I do, I've never let them do that now. But that's terrible. I want to live in a community where where people can safely walk to school, or where after work I feel like, I can go for a walk, I can make that choice, and I can build it in. I don't have to go to a gym. This shows the states with the lowest level of biking and walking have on average the highest rates of obesity, diabetes, and high blood pressure. One of the things, so when I moved to DC, I gave up my car. In part because I chose to live in the city, and rent there is very, very high, and I live in a smaller place. I made a lifestyle choice. And I ended up, I'm actually pretty impatient, and sometimes our metro, which is in the national news right now for not being the greatest system, it can be pretty slow. And so I started walking everywhere, and and all of a sudden I was like, oh, my pants are shrinking. And I didn't have to join a gym, and just the fact that now I go to the grocery store on foot, or I take my bike, and sometimes I do get on the metro when I'm feeling more patient, really has just, it's now part of, I talked about I change what I put in my body, now I change how I move my body. And I don't have to think about I have to go to the gym tonight, because it's just what I do on my walk home. But I'm not the only one that thinks this. The Center for Disease Control has actually identified complete streets as one of the key strategies to prevent obesity. And I actually work really closely with the CDC on complete streets. And I am so sorry you can't read this, but this just shows that a third of transit users get their minimum daily activity just by taking the bus, and that's 20 minutes. That's just your walk to the bus. Again, you don't have to pay for a gym membership. You don't have to get on those awful clothes and get on the elliptical, which is my worst nightmare. And then the economics. There's a lot of people want choices, but there's limited dollars. We talked about, do I really want to spend all of my money on transportation? I'd much rather go on a vacation or get my hair done, or save for the future, save for my children. These walkable, bikeable places like Meyer said, they generate tax revenues, and they attract and retain businesses. We published a report, the Complete Streets Coalition with Smart Growth America published a report last year called Safer Streets, Stronger Economies. And what we did is we worked with 14 communities to look at their, what we call return on investment in building complete streets projects. And so some of the not so obvious, but also obvious ones were there were safer streets. People bike and walked and used transit more. But we also learned that these projects were more affordable than car-only projects, and that they had a huge economic benefit. The vacancy rates along these streets with bike lanes and trees and sidewalks had lower vacancy rates, higher tax revenue, and it's actually pretty logical when you think about. I think about actually, when I am walking, I walk home from work every day, and it's so dangerous because I'll be like, oh, I know that that jewelry store, they must have something new in, or I'll just stop at the grocery store because I'd really like a glass of wine with dinner, because drivers don't make good window shoppers, but walkers really do. And this is just, John Robert talked about some case studies, but this is over in California, but in this pretty small-sized community. This project in Lancaster, California, I believe won the 2012 EPA Smart Growth Award project, which is why I wanted to highlight this. But they looked at an 8-block intersection, and they decided to use a complete streets approach to redo the streetscape. And what it did is it not only reduced speeding and fewer crashes, but it brought in 15 new businesses, 800 new jobs, the vacancy rate went down to 4%, and the sales tax revenue went up 26%. So this is like a win, 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 win. And then equity, I think, many people, what we call, there are choice users and there are dependent users. I would consider myself in DC now, I choose not to have a car, but there are many people who cannot afford to have a car, and they are reliant on the transit system to get around, and they're spending a huge amount of their funding on their income on transportation, and they don't have access to opportunity. They don't have access to those jobs they want. If I suddenly wanted a job, 30 miles outside the city, I'd go and buy a car. I'd be a little bit crabby about, or I'd move out there because I have that financial mobility, but not everyone does. And then it provides choices. People are going to walk if they have a sidewalk. People are going to bike if they feel safe. And then this is again, so transportation is the second largest expense for families, but low-income households can spend over half of their budget on transportation, which is insane when you think about it. So Complete Streets gives people more control over their expenses. And then capacity. So, I've heard nobody wants to be in their cars. Nobody wants to be stuck in traffic. And I bring this picture up again from Seattle, but this is and if you can see this shows how many people you can move. I believe this is in Austin. So you've got 40 people by car, by themselves, 40 people by bus and by walking, 40 people by bikes. You can show how many more people you can just move through a system. So when you're trying to get people, when you have congestion, when you have rush hour, how many more people you can, so it's not actually, if some people start to get out of their cars, you're actually not going to be sitting in traffic as much. So it's, so what's next? Why are we here? I think Mayor Smith talked a lot about this, but we're here to work tomorrow in a smaller group with the city to start just thinking through some of these. What would it look like to have a complete streets policy in Huntsville? What would it look like if we really used if we put on those glasses that I was talking about and looked at some of the bigger corridors here? So we'll be doing that tomorrow, and we're really excited to just start. It'll be interactive and a way to just start thinking about. Again, this isn't me saying you should just go put a bike lane. I don't know. I don't know what's right for Huntsville, which is great, is that we're here to give you the tools to figure out what you want and what you need and what best fits your community. So again, thank you so much for having both of us here.